What makes people follow some rules and ignore others? Because rules don't necessitate appropriate behavior, not at least without the help of social norms. That's where behavior science comes in, helping us understand the invisible forces that guide human decisions. At CSBC, we bridge the gap between policy and practice by leveraging the missing link, insights on human behavior.
Fundamentally, there are 3 or 4 types of levers, broad levers that can produce behavior change. The first one is, of course, this business of formal institutions. Then the second lever that we have at hand is this whole business of social norms, the sphere of social norms. The third lever is nudges. The fourth lever, the markets. And the fifth category is commitment devices, which help people stick to a particular course or a path that they have decided for themselves and help them change their own behavior for the better. Jon Elster, the famous Norwegian social thinker, has written about Ulysses and the sirens. Ulysses is this mythical character who goes on a journey, and he's tempted by the lure of these sirens. And in order to restrain himself from making a bad decision, he asks to be tied to the mast of the ship so that he doesn't give in to temptation. So how do we use commitment devices in the work that we do? We were posed a very interesting challenge by the government, and that is, how do we get parents to ensure that their newborn children between the ages of 0 and 6 months are exclusively breastfed? Why? Because the consumption of water at this particular period can render the child vulnerable to disease and infections. So one of the things that we did at CSBC was to create these self-administered pledges that can be taken in a public space.
आज हम शपथ लेते हैं जो छोटा बच्चा है 6 महीने तक माँ का दूध और कुछ भी नहीं.
Now, pledges are not unusual in our cultural ethos.
गीता पे हाथ रख के कसम खाइए.
We take the pledge of dedication.
मैं गंगा पुत्र देवव्रत आज ये प्रतिज्ञा करता हूँ.
Bhishma is an exemplar of a publicly taken pledge to remain celibate. So that is an example of how commitment devices have always been a natural part of our cultural ethos or our mythology. A publicly taken pledge is an emotional way in which the person sticks to this plan that they only feed the child breast milk and nothing else between 0 and 6 months.
Why does the scrutinizing look of your neighbor work better often than the long arm of the law? In pandemic-like situations where there is a public health crisis, monitoring everyone, policing everyone can be very costly, it can be very time-consuming. And so what can often work better are decentralized, socially enforced norms. This is the concept we leaned in our Wear the Mask campaign, where we framed mask wearing as a social signal. Wear the mask not for yourself, but do it because everyone around you is wearing it and they're noticing who isn't.
We focused on everyday people as messengers, as opposed to using celebrities. And this was to amplify relatability, the power of saying that people like me do this. We use the 4R model, responsibility, reminder, reprimand, and respect, to break complex behaviors down into actionable steps for both citizens as well as policymakers.
Why make a rule when a look can do?
There's a strange paradox in human thinking. We often believe in invisible myths, but not in invisible realities, like the bacteria in our drinking water. People assume that water is safe to drink if it feels, looks, and tastes clear. But in the process, they often overlook or ignore the presence of invisible contaminants. So in our work, we leverage the behavioral principle of loss aversion, which is the idea of human beings to weigh potential losses more than equivalent gains. And we designed a behaviorally focused video that talked about the presence of invisible contaminants in water and how those contaminants influence negatively consequences on health. We used the behavioral principle of gamification to design a game called Water Test or Taste Game, which made salient the idea of water quality and water testing in people's mind. And we found that the game, along with the video, increased the demand for water quality testing by over 50% in treatment households compared to the control households. And this report is now being used nationwide to drive behavior change in Jal Jeevan Mission.
India has close to 1 billion internet subscribers, and this gives us a tremendous opportunity to reach out to these people individually through their mobile phones. But this is also an extremely competitive space, and in this attention economy, you tend to trust and believe only those people whom you're already following on the internet. These influencers have become the most visible and critical cornerstones of the internet as it is today. But here's a key question. How do you get these influencers to spread key public health messages? That's where the tracker model comes in. This is a model that is based on the transfer of creative ownership of these messages from the organizations to these content creators and in encouraging them to spread these messages for likes, shares and subscribers.
एक फोटो हमारे साथ भी।
माया अच्छा खाना खाती है, आयरन की गोली टाइम पे लेती है और रेगुलर टेस्ट करवाती है। इसीलिए माया की लाइफ में अनीमिया नहीं, खुशियां हैं।
Through this campaign, we aim to not just raise awareness around anemia, but to encourage this woman to get tested, to take charge of their own health, and to become Iron Naris themselves. Over the last 4 months, the Bano Iron Nari campaign has gained over 180 million impressions and over 80 million views for the videos alone.
Just like we use narratives online, we also use a lot of storytelling offline because it's such a powerful tool. In rural Bihar, misinformation about the COVID vaccine spread quickly and far. Women were worried that side effects from the vaccine would impact their ability to breastfeed or even to have children in the future. In this context, Jeevika's frontline health workers were going out and trying to persuade women to get the vaccine, and it wasn't always easy. They were being dismissed, sometimes ridiculed. We even heard a story of someone having a door slammed in her face. Information alone wasn't enough for these workers because their goal wasn't to win an argument. They needed to build trust and to reframe the vaccination as a personally responsible act. So they needed communication tools that worked with emotion instead of against it. So our team in Bihar turned to narratives, and they designed stories that were emotionally resonant with women's real lives. In one video, they compared 2 women who made different decisions about taking the vaccine and followed through on the consequences that they could potentially have on not just the women, but their kids and their whole families.
अपने परिवार को कोरोना के साए से सुरक्षित रखने का मौका मिला। एक ने समझदारी दिखाई और टीका लगवाया।
This video reframed vaccination not as a compliance with a government mandate, but as an act of love for your children. In pilot districts, vaccination rates rose from 86% to 98%.
We all think we are unbiased. We all think we can spot bias. But what if we are all wrong? The implicit association test, or the IAT, was developed in the mid-90s by Anthony Greenwald and Mazarin Banerjee, who's now at Harvard, to identify unconscious bias.
the kind that you may not be aware of, but impacts your everyday decisions.
Do you rely more on information to take that call, or is it like a gut feeling?
Starts with information, has to end with an instinct.
The driver was female, and the decision my friend made was, let's stay flat. I don't trust the driver.
Especially, it's not वो तुम्हारा काम नहीं करेंगे, right? But it's किस tone में बात कर रहे हैं वो तुमसे, वो तुम्हें कितना respect दे रहे हैं.
None of us, not even the most self-aware, the most intelligent, the most self-righteous, or even the most powerful, are immune. When it comes to fairness, each and every one of us has blind spots. To be a decision maker, you need unbiased information. And therefore, we decided that we needed to, first of all, measure the bias and then communicate it in a non-adversarial manner with these people. So that's the really cool and interesting thing that we did at Labasta. And this was facilitated by this really visionary director then, Mr. Srinivas Kakitala, who's a bit of a scholar and who's willing to experiment. We got them to write a story where they needed to assign some roles and so on. And then we got them to play the IIT privately on their mobile phones and discover whether they themselves were vulnerable to implicit biases. Suddenly, because they have now become aware of their implicit biases, they were willing to consider rewriting their story. This project is important from another broader point of view, and that is, it ties in very nicely with this vision that the Honorable Prime Minister has for administrative reforms in the country. And I do believe that we can play a tremendous role in this journey and this vision that the Prime Minister has laid out for the country. I think a certain amount of experimentation is required, a certain amount of behavior science is required to produce the kind of administrative transformation that we need to produce in this country with the civil services.
At CSBC, research is part of everything that we do. We're not here to guess what might work. We want to know why people behave the way they do. We use qualitative methods and structured surveys built around existing behavioral frameworks like CALM-B or motivation, ability, opportunity. We run lab experiments to understand how our interventions change knowledge and attitudes about behavior. We conduct small-scale field pilots to understand feasibility in a real-world complex setting. We also get excited about measurement. We combine data and creativity to reveal a new behavioral insight or to test with a lot of certainty that something is actually working. To date, we've published over 20 peer-reviewed papers, and they span topics like sanitation, law, governance, financial inclusion, and health. 8 of our papers are about vaccines or vaccine hesitation, and that's really important because it's an area where behavioral insights have proven to be critical.
At CSBC, our work doesn't stop at research. We continue momentum till we create real, meaningful impact on the ground. In fact, CSBC is one of the first organizations to set up nudge units in the country, which we call the Behavioural Insights Units. These units are mandated to work across a plethora of issues, both of national and state relevance, be it reproductive, maternal, newborn child health, financial inclusion, labour reforms, climate, or sanitation. Over the last few years, we've been able to complete 145 projects across 24 states, reaching 500 million people. We are grateful that the government places its trust in us to continue building these behavioral solutions so that citizens that need them the most have access to them.
Our long-standing partnership has meant that we've seen the CSBC relationship mature in its work nationally and in states, moving from academia to applied work, thus impacting real policy.
So CSBC brings together a bunch of really eclectic group of people with different skill set, different talents. We have people ranging from behavioral scientists to economists, and we are all working towards problem solving, which is an extremely collaborative process. Our process itself requires us to learn, prototype, test, and then adapt ourselves towards the problem that we are trying to solve. So that, I think, is really intrinsic to the culture of CSBC. We are all ultimately working towards a common goal. We are aligned with mission and vision of CSBC. And creating that social impact together is inherent to each of the team members.
So behavior science is the gap between what systems are designed to do and how people respond to them. And that's why it's so critical that India needs a center like CSBC. At Ashoka, we've also believed that institutions like us need to play a key role in nation building. We must not only produce knowledge, but also play a role in improving lives. CSBC is one of the best examples of that.
For us at Ashoka University, building a great university is not just about having great teaching and great research. It's also about having impact on the community, the society, the country, and ultimately the world. And CSBC is our vehicle, is our way of doing that. It's a very unique aspect of Ashoka. It's a real jewel in our crown, which brings behavior science to the real world. Our unique approach at CSBC is that we are combining behavior science with policy and its implementation. CSBC's work has already impacted millions across multiple states, and we believe that we can continue to make significant contributions, especially as India moves towards Viksit Bharat, and really be a partner with the government in achieving the goals of a developed India.
For the construction of the future, you need these three elements: humility, scientific rigor, and a bit of nerdy hustle. And that's exactly what CSBC is. It's a combination of these three elements.